Top Stars Extra on ITV2 now. Here on Carlton, the ITV Nightly News.
Hospital chief resigns over dead bodies in chapel. Annual figures to show big rise in violent crime. Rescued from the rubble of El Salvador's earthquake. And the grocer in court for selling a pound of bananas.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. The chief executive of a hospital where bodies were dumped in a chapel because the mortuary was full resigned tonight. Ken Williams quit his post at Bedford Hospital after the local health authority condemned the practice as totally unacceptable. Its director apologised to the relatives of those who died and promised it would never be allowed to happen again. Paul Davis's report from the hospital contains pictures of those bodies in the chapel.
The findings of the preliminary investigation announced tonight talk of unacceptable practices at Bedford Hospital, with official NHS guidelines covering the treatment of the dead being ignored.
The guidance insists that patients are treated with respect and dignity. That was certainly not the case at the hospital last week.
These are the images that cost the hospital's senior manager his job. Bodies stored unceremoniously on the floor of an unrefrigerated room in the Chapel of Rest. NHS investigators spent the day inspecting the hospital's mortuary facilities, including an emergency storage container which was malfunctioning and out of use last week. Local photographer Ian Miles took the pictures that caused such an outcry, having been directed to the makeshift morgue by a concerned source at the hospital.
I just felt like it was the scene that you might find in a war-torn third world country and not South Wing Bedford Hospital.
Bereaved mother Anne Eastwell was appalled by the hospital's treatment of the dead. Her 16-year-old daughter Jenna died in Bedford last week. Her body is being stored for a post-mortem operation.
I honestly think that sardines are packed better in a tin for their death rather than human beings. And the person who put them like that, would they like their daughter, mother, father slung aside in that room?
The hospital chief executive admits the treatment of the dead was unacceptable.
We must treat everyone with dignity, and particularly those that have died. And clearly we failed on this particular occasion.
Tonight, Chief Executive Ken Williams paid the price for that failure, offering his resignation as well as unreserved apologies for the distress caused by this episode. Paul Davis, ITN, Bedford.
The annual crime figures out tomorrow are expected to show a sharp rise in violent crime in England and Wales, though overall the crime level is thought to have fallen slightly. The government is also expected to point to a big increase in the number of police recruits. Lauren Taylor reports.
Out on patrol in Essex tonight, officers are called to a burglary.
Hello? What's happened?
A man has conned his way into a pensioner's house and ransacked her bedroom before running off with her wallet. She's shaken, but luckily unhurt.
What does he look like?
In the latest recorded crime figures to be released tomorrow, the most worrying trend is the rise in violent crime, which includes robbery and assault. One big growth area is the theft of mobile phones.
The groups come up from London or have got access points from stations around, the underground stations, and they're stealing the phones off the young kids coming out of school.
The Tories blame the increase in those sorts of offences on cuts in police numbers.
As far as robbery goes, a lot of it is street robbery, and we do know that the huge fall in police, the total invisibility of police in some areas, will have led to people feeling that they can carry out robberies with impunity.
Control, gone from M72 for a vehicle check.
Police targeting of particular areas such as car crime and burglary has proved successful. Those figures are expected to be down, as is the overall crime rate. There are, however, big variations between regions, with the southeast coming off worse than the north. There's no doubt that a rise in violent crime is politically damaging for the government. Tomorrow, ministers are likely to stress that overall crime rates are falling. They'll also publish new figures showing a big increase in recruitment to try to show that they are responding to the calls for more bobbies on the beat. Lauren Taylor, ITN, Essex.
Desperate attempts are continuing to try to find survivors trapped by the massive earthquake which hit El Salvador on Saturday. Hundreds have already died there and as many as 1,000 are still missing. But as Robert Moore reports, for one young man, a remarkable rescue was possible.
He had survived in an air pocket for 30 hours. 22-year-old Sergio Moreno had used his mobile phone to call a friend and plead for help from beneath the rubble. Amid the chaotic scenes of the rescue effort, it was a rare success, pulling someone alive from the ruins of this suburb of San Salvador. 2 days after the earthquake and the death toll is still climbing. So far, over 400 are confirmed dead. But as the bodies are brought down from outlying villages, it seems that well over 1,000 people may have lost their lives. It follows a tragic sequence of events. First, the earthquake, then the mudslide it triggered, bringing down much of the hillside and ripping the heart out of this middle-class community. Specialized dog teams from around the world are now on the ground, but their efforts are made more difficult because of the frequency of aftershocks that are still rocking the area. Even though rescue workers are continuing to dig, no one is now expecting any more survivors to be found. The emphasis instead is shifting to helping the homeless. This was an earthquake that was felt right across Central America, but it was one suburb in El Salvador's capital that bore the brunt of the disaster. The mass burials are now underway. The appeal for coffins has gone out, leaving behind the grief of a community. Robert Moore, ITN.
And here the government today announced an aid package of more than £600,000 for El Salvador. British charities have launched appeals to help victims of the earthquake. Railtrack admitted today that the cost of getting Britain's trains back on track after the Hatfield crash would be £600 million, twice its original estimate. It said that left the company pretty stretched, but denied that passengers would pick up the bill. Here's Chris Choi.
Railtrack working on the line again today. Meanwhile, the company explained how improving the network has blown its finances off track. Work needed after the Hatfield crash will cost £600 million, double previous estimates.
The amount of work we've found, the number of sites we've got to re-rail has increased by about 80%. So that's gone up, the work's gone up, and obviously as a result the cost goes up.
As the Railtrack work continues, it forms the biggest ever overhaul of the network. Both the company and government promised safety at any price. Up until now, that's been a fairly vague concept. Now we know what the bill will be.
And it amounts to a dramatic downturn in Railtrack's fortunes. In 1998, the company made a profit of £404 million, rising to £428 million a year later, and £360 million last year. Now the company faces the prospect of significant losses. On behalf of passengers, campaigners warned industry not to make up losses by boosting ticket prices.
Well, we hope the passengers will not end up paying for it. They've already had one large increase just a few weeks ago. Another increase would be wholly out of place, since this is work that should have been done in the first place anyway.
Leeds was the setting for a further Railtrack setback today. Passengers were furious when redevelopment work due to end did not, leading to cancellation and delay. Another indication of how disruption is impacting on both passengers and profits. Chris Choi, ITN.
A greengrocer from Sunderland found himself in court today for selling his fruit and veg in pounds and ounces and not kilos and grams. Stephen Thoburn's local council says that means he's flouting European law, but his lawyers said today that British law should take precedence. Linda Kennedy reports on the start of a landmark case.
Tonight, metric martyr Steve Thoburn left court after lawyers argued British law is more important than European. His shop sells in marks in pounds, flouting last year's law from Brussels which demands sales in kilos, but for now allows advertising in imperial and metric. The complex case between Mr Thoburn and Sunderland Trading Standards is a focal point for campaigners, especially other shopkeepers.
A lot of traders in the town are still selling pounds and ounces, and we will continue to do so, because all of these people here, the whole population of Britain, wants an imperial system.
Today's case turns on legal argument, with Mr Thoburn's lawyers saying the 1985 Weights and Measures Act, allowing the use of imperial measures, is more important than a European amendment, telling traders they must sell loose items in kilos, against, it seems, consumers' wishes, who today knew which they prefer.
Pound. Most definitely pound, not kilos. confuses me.
And it's for customers he's pursuing the case, which could end with a £1,000 fine or incur costs of up to £250,000. Supporters have so far raised £30,000 with donations from newspapers and the UK Independence Party to achieve the goal spelled out today of saving the pound. For some, this case pits Britain against Europe, showing how traditions are being eroded. The outcome will be watched avidly. Linda Kennedy, ITN, Sunderland.
Prince Charles spent half an hour with his aunt, Princess Margaret, at the King Edward VII Hospital in London today and said she was coming on very well. The Prince, who had his arm in a sling after breaking a bone in his shoulder, is the most senior member of the royal family to visit the sick princess. She's been in hospital since Wednesday after suffering a suspected stroke. The Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak today closed off the Gaza Strip and called off peace talks with the Palestinians after a Jewish settler was found shot dead. The killing also sparked off violent reprisals by other settlers. From Jerusalem, here's Andrea Catherwood.
Tension and tight security continue in Gaza tonight after 24 hours of violence that's brought the Middle East peace process to a grinding halt. It was triggered by news Palestinians had kidnapped an Israeli settler last night. Israeli troops poured in to lead the search, but it was all in vain. 32-year-old Ronit Salah had been shot in the head, his body dumped near his home. He was buried this evening. His murder is a tragedy for his family, a disaster for the peace process. Israel immediately cancelled talks because of this killing, with just 5 days to reach an agreement before the main backer of the peace process, Bill Clinton, steps down.
Terrible, terrible blow for the peace process. And I know that at the same time, when every Palestinian is killed, it's a blow to the peace process. But unfortunately, the side who initiated this round of violence is the Palestinian side.
But the violence wasn't over. Israeli friends of the murdered man went on the rampage in a Palestinian area. These men are setting fire to the car. Inside huddle Palestinian women. And as the car goes up in flames, they fear for their lives. There is no talk of peace here tonight, and between the two sides, there are no talks at all. Andrea Catherwood, ITN, Jerusalem.
Tennis, and Britain's top player Tim Henman is through to the second round of the Australian Open in Melbourne. Henman, seeded 8th in the tournament, beat Morocco's Hicham Aratzi in straight sets. He'll now play Ecuador's Nicolas Lepenti tomorrow. Lepenti beat Henman at Wimbledon last year. The current world heavyweight boxing champion Lennox Lewis squared up today against the all-time great Muhammad Ali, but not in a boxing ring. The pair were promoting a new video game, but Lewis took the opportunity to name his next title fight. A warning: Graham Miller's report contains flash photography.
One is still the greatest, recognised all over the world. The other desperate to finalise a fight that would secure his place in world boxing history. Muhammad Ali, named Sportsman of the Century last year, is 59 on Wednesday. The old magic, they say, never disappears, and despite the debilitating effects of Parkinson's disease, he can still captivate an audience with tricks of the hand. Lennox revealed the next defence of his world titles will be in April, but it won't be against Mike Tyson. Boxing's first $100 million showdown, he says, is still only a possibility.
The Lennox Lewis-Mike Tyson matchup is the ultimate matchup. I think it'll be a great thing. You know, this is a fight that the entire world has been waiting for. I've been waiting for, and I think it's going to be one of the biggest fights in history. How do I perceive Mike Tyson mentally? You know, he's got his problems. Whether he can be cleared to be able to step in the ring and actually box for a heavyweight championship is the question right now.
Ali was presented with a cake for his birthday. He'll appear with Lennox again tomorrow at the World Sports Awards. Graham Miller, ITN Sport.
Tonight's main headlines again. The chief executive of Bedford Hospital, where bodies were stored in a chapel, has resigned tonight, and the annual crime figures out tomorrow are expected to show a sharp rise in violent crime. Tonight's financial figures: the FTSE 100 index finished a day of slow trading, up just 5 points nearly. In New York, the Dow Jones closed down more than 84 points, and the pound was virtually unchanged against the dollar compared to last Friday. Now time for a glance at tomorrow's papers. And The Guardian leads on the resignation of Bedford Hospital's chief executive after dead bodies were found left in a chapel. Its picture is of a lone angler on the first day of the salmon fishing season. The Mail describes a woman's discovery that her father's body was one of those left in the chapel. The front page picture shows Joan Collins at the premiere of her new film. The greengrocer in court for using pounds and ounces is the Telegraph's top story. It carries a picture of Stephen Thoburn on his way to court in Sunderland. The Mirror says a hero of the Paddington rail crash has been sacked on the day he was nominated for a bravery award. Wayne Levy is shown in hospital after the accident. Finally, the Sun's back page claims Sven-Göran Eriksson was hoaxed into revealing that David Beckham is to be the new England captain. Apparently, someone rang him up pretending to be his predecessor as coach, Kevin Keegan. And that's the news tonight. The ITV Evening News is at 6:30 tomorrow. I'll be here again at 11 from all the ITV Nightly News team. Goodbye.
Gas, electricity and telephone.
Good evening. Well, at least it's not raining and there will be some more fine weather to look forward to later on this week. But you'll have noticed it's a bit chilly with the winds continuing to come in off the continent. That's the way it will stay. And we'll watch out for some freezing fog patches at times too. That's the case tonight. Most of the fog across the northern half of the country, some of it quite dense. The cloud will come and go, but it won't prevent those temperatures dipping well below freezing in many places, as low as -6 or below in some Scottish glens. So an icy start tomorrow, a dry one but a foggy one in some places, again especially in the north, and that fog will take a time to clear. Eventually it will, and most of us can look forward to a fine day with some lengthy spells of sunshine to come. Eventually though it will tend to cloud over in the southwest with a chance of 1 or 2 showery outbreaks, some snow up over the highest ground perhaps, but amounts will be very small. Most of us enjoying a fine day, but a cold one. Temperatures really struggling, perhaps no higher than around 2 or 3 degrees in many places. 3 is 37 Fahrenheit, with a chilly breeze coming in from the east. That's it. Here's a summary.
Powergen. Gas, electricity and telephone.
London Tonight, now on Carlton with Kate Harding.
Good evening. Mayor Livingston has spent his first full day in America on a fact-finding mission to New York and Washington. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has been with him. Top of today's agenda, the fight against crime.
Very nice to see you. Great pleasure. Great pleasure to have you here. How are you enjoying it?
This was the moment the most famous elected mayor in the world met Britain's only elected mayor. Rudy Giuliani and Ken Livingstone got together in New York this morning for breakfast and small talk about crime.
What struck me, I mean, I've always seen the films about the horrors of the Bronx and all that. I walk completely without any qualms right now. I mean,
the Bronx is one of our safer places now.
Battery Park is somewhere Ken Livingstone might feel at home at. This is New York's Identikit Docklands, at the southern tip of Manhattan, in the shadow of the World Trade Center on the banks of the Hudson River. Once the stopping-off point for ocean liners and freighters, it's now 92 acres of reclaimed land in place of piers and wharfs.
The look is uncanny, but there is one obvious difference between Canary Wharf and Battery Park. This is primarily about housing, not offices, and eventually it'll be home to 25,000 people.
Roberto Bonsignori, Sara de Toma and their 2-year-old Matteo came here from Rome via Brussels last March. Roberto's a Wall Street lawyer, which probably tells us all we need to know about how much these apartments cost. But the couple believe there's a real attempt to create a community here.
I was expecting a city more difficult to live in, more rough, more dangerous maybe. But I found out that this was not true, particularly here, but in New York City in general, but particularly in Battery Park City.
This is the new mantra of New Yorkers. Theirs is a safe city. But then in Battery, even if there's not a cop on every corner, there is a Parks police officer.
Mayor Giuliani's taken the police force from the size it is in London, and increase it by the best part of about 50 or 60%. And I think a lot of Londoners would say that that's what we need to do there.
This is Simon Harris for London Tonight.
Well, Ken tries to learn lessons from New York. A row over his plans for London's police has broken out here. The Association of London Government has attacked his plans to raise council tax across the capital to increase police numbers. But London's top policeman says wherever it comes from, the extra funding is crucial.
All I'm asking for is the acceptance that 3,000 officers are needed for the streets of London. Everybody accepts that. Where the difficulty arises is in the means that we get that money to get extra officers on the street. And we need those officers. Everybody knows that.
The survivors and families of 14 young black people who died in the blaze in New Cross 20 years ago were given a forum to talk about their grief for the first time. And as Marcus Powell reports, emotions are still running high.
Wayne Hayes, terribly burned and still crippled by the New Cross fire of 20 years ago, speaks of the trauma that still haunts him. He wants to know why he was so badly injured and 14 other children died.
Though I've moved on in my life and I have a son and I have a wife, I still feel hurt in my heart for my friends that aren't here. I still feel hurt in my heart for myself.
The blaze, which claimed so many young lives on January the 18th, 1981, was never properly dealt with. First, it was believed to be a racist attack, although a re-investigation by police today suggests it was arson. The fire started with a match in a downstairs room shortly before 6 a.m, points suspicion to adults at the party, but it's still unclear. To compensate for errors of the past, local MP Joan Ruddock arranged a public hearing for the victims, their families and friends.
Today, most of us are convinced that the fire was not the result of a white racist attack. But I believe there was another kind of white crime committed. The failure of the establishment and the wider society to acknowledge the pain and the loss of the black families.
The community wants answers. 2 people at the party still deny it and refuse to speak to the police. The homeowner also refuses to fully cooperate.
I cannot rest until the adults that was in that house is subpoenaed and been made to tell what happened in that house.
This is Marcus Powell for London Tonight.
Meanwhile, a man has died following a fire at a flat in Brixton. The fire brigade were called to the flat in Bob Marley Way at about 7:20 this evening. 4 women escaped the blaze, but crews discovered the body of a man in a corridor. The victim has not been named. A comprehensive school in Hertfordshire has been forced to make drastic cuts in its timetable because of a teacher shortage. St Mary's High School in Cheshunt will have 4-day weeks every other week for its 11, 12 and 13-year-olds. Its 14-year-olds will miss an hour of lessons every week. Haringey Council is interviewing 4 more social services staff over the death of Anna Clumbier. 8-year-old Anna was murdered by her great-aunt and her great-aunt's boyfriend. They were jailed for life on Friday. Anna's social worker, Lisa Arthur-Worray, has been suspended pending an investigation. That's all for now. We're back tomorrow at 6:10 in the morning. Till then, good night.
Carlton Weather, sponsored by Amarada.co.uk, suppliers of gas and electricity.
Good evening. Well, I wouldn't go out again tonight if you can possibly help it. It's frosty out there, temperatures dipping to -3, so some icy stretches, perhaps 1 or 2 mist patches too. So a pretty wintry start tomorrow, a frost, but plenty of sunshine, and that's the way it'll stay, I think, throughout the day. That frost slowly lifting, but by afternoon temperatures aren't going to get much higher than 3 degrees typically, perhaps 5 in the middle of London. 5 is only 41 Fahrenheit, still with that chilly easterly breeze. And the outlook remains every bit as cold for the foreseeable future. Temperatures really struggling, turning cloudy too, with some patchy rain or sleet turning up towards the end of the week. That's it from me. Here's tomorrow's summary.
Carlton Weather, sponsored by Amarada.co.uk.